Well, it's time to get back to work on the Bugeye. What I want to do is replace the ball bearings that are currently in the car with the tapered roller bearings that I got from Moss Motors. It comes in a kit. Instructions are over here. But as you can see, I have a bit of cleaning up to do before I can get started on any of that. And just an update on all the parts that I had for sale that I posted a video on a little while ago. A lot of those parts have gone to new homes all across the US, Canada, and parts of Europe. And I've got some of the cockpit trim left, some of the gauges left that will need rebuilding. Still have the gearbox and a few other items. Got a newer radiator, an older radiator that's in very dire need of repair. Still have some of the boxes sitting around that I've kind of accumulated to help ship all these parts. So as you can see, I do have some cleaning up to do before I can get to work on those bearings. So let's stop talking and get that cleaning up done. Well, as I mentioned a couple of videos ago, there's a couple of things. There are some things I'm going to work on over the winter here, and that's installing this power outlet with the USB and what have you, and also a third brake light that I'm going to work into the hardtop. But those are for another day, so I'll just put those aside. And as you can see, things are a lot tidier. I've got still some things. I have some repairs to make on the stool here. But generally, I've got the boxes out of the way and a bench is all cleared up. So what I'm going to be working on next is this bearing kit. So I'm just going to give you a quick rundown on what's included in the kit before we start work on the actual car. There's some grease. There's the seal. There's the two bearings, the inner and outer, a new cotter pin, and a new castle nut. And there's a bit of a spacer there. And then in the other box, let's open it this side. Another set of the instructions, and there's a whole bunch of shims. Another castle nut, another spacer, the bearing for that side, and then there we have the two bearings, some more grease, and a new cotter pin. So that's an overview of what the kit includes, and I'll get into where and why you would use these shims a little bit later. So before I can go any further, of course, is I need to remove the wheels and get the bearings off. So let's get to work on that. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is jack up the car. But before I go too much further, I'm going to loosen the lug nuts. There we go, got those loose. I'll just get my jack stands. That's not going anywhere. So I'll finish taking these lug nuts off. All right, get the wheel off, and we'll set that aside. So now that I have the wheel off, next thing to do is get the brake caliper unbolted. These bolts, this bolt here and this one here just holds the two halves of the caliper together, so I'm not going to touch that at all. So once I've got the caliper off and hung off to the side, I can get the dust cap off, remove the cotter pin, remove the nut, and then I can slide the whole assembly off the spindle. Okay, I've got the wheel turned so I can get better access to the two bolts on the back of the caliper here. I think those are 9/16. Where are we here? There's one. Nope, it's 5/8. Yeah, this one first. Okay, there's one of them out. Now I have one of my little magnetic trays, so I'll just throw that in there. And that's the other one out. And then we can just slide this off. And I will just, it'll stick in there. I'll just stick that up in the corner here. There's that triangular opening, so I'll just stick that in there, and there's no weight or on the hose. So next up, I'm going to pop the grease cap off. Oops, oh, that didn't work. I'll get that back in there. Now let's use the big screwdriver to pry this off. And just work my way slowly around. And that'll come right out of there. There we go. And I'll get my pliers. I've got that far enough up, I can just grab that with the cutting edge, get a bit more of a grip. And of course, I'll be using a new cotter pin when I put this all back together. So there's dust cap off, cotter pin out. Now I just got to loosen this nut off. There we go. There we go, there's that, the nut off. Now just set that aside. And theoretically, this should just pop right off. There we go. What I'm going to do now is I'll take this thing over to the bench and we'll work on it over there. Now, one thing I'm going to do to make this a little easier to work on is I'm going to take the rotor off the hub, because all the bearings and seals and everything are just in the hub itself. So I will use the air tools for this one. And I know I shouldn't do this, but I need a thin wall 9/16 to get in for those. So it's so there we go. I'll set this aside. I'll put all the bolts for that in the magnetic tray there. And theoretically, that should just come off. There we go. So that just leaves us with the hub itself. So I'll get this taken apart and we can see what we're dealing with. So the first thing I'm going to do, let's get this up a little higher. So what I'm going to do first is take the washer out of there. I'll set that aside. I'll be reusing that. I'll just clean the inside of this off. And we'll flip it over. We'll pull the seal out. And clean that up. So in between the inner and outer bearing, there's actually a cone, for lack of a better term. And what I'm going to try and do, see if I can get that to move over so I can use it to push out the bearings. Now the manual suggests starting from the back and tapping the outer bearing out. So I'll just go get a drift and a hammer. So what I'm going to do, so I don't knock the wheel studs out, is I'm going to put a block of wood under here to lift this off the workbench. See if I can get that. That's going to have to be smaller than that. There we go. I'll probably do it. Perfect. Okay, what I've got is I have a metal part from another toolkit. I'll just use that. So that gets the ends of the studs off the workbench and allow me to hammer this out. Like that. Now you can see there's the cone part. I'll get that cleaned off briefly, and then you can see here all the little ball bearings that came out. I'm going to set those aside. So I'm just going to slide that into there so I don't have little ball bearings rolling all over the place. Now I'll flip this over and I'll be able to drive out the other end. There we go. So I'll put those off to the side there. And then I'll set that aside. And now we have to get the races out from inside the hub here. So I'm just going to take my drift and carefully, get my thing underneath there again so I don't pop that And you can, there's a, it's hard to show in the video, but there is a lip that you can get some purchase on for the drift, and then start to tap it out. And I like to kind of rock it back and forth. Do one side and then the other. It might take a few. And that should be coming out. Yep, that's moving. That's reached my part there. And I'll take that out from underneath there. And then that should pop that one right out. So there's the race for the, that's the outer. And then we'll just flip it over. Now, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this on here, but right down inside here, there's a little notch that'll allow me to get the drift onto the back of that bearing race there. There's one on the other side. I'll just go back and forth between the two sides. And that'll be our bearing out. There we go. So, and there's the bearing race for the other set of bearings. So now we have a clean hub, or a bearing-less hub. So I'm going to get that all cleaned up, and then we'll come back in a few minutes and show you how everything is going to go back together. These are the parts from the standard bearing setup that we'll still be using: the dust cap, the washer that goes on the front, and the spacer cone, and of course the hub itself. Now it's been cleaned all up inside and out. There's the two bearings. The larger one is the inner bearing that goes in there, and the smaller one is the outer bearing that goes in there. The spacer goes between the two. Make sure we get this approximately right here. The spacer goes between the two, and that one goes, that'll go that way. So that'll go on top like that, with the bearing races pointing towards the center. So they'll be angled in somewhat like that, with the spacer in between. Now, to follow the assembly instructions, the first thing to do is do the outer races into the hub. So that one, this one will go in here. So we'll get this one in here, and need to find a socket that's a little bit smaller, just a tiny bit smaller than the ridge there, and I can use that as a driver. I don't have a press. So this is a 33 millimeter socket. So I'm just going to use that to gently drive that bearing race in. Now you can't drive this in too far because there's a major lip in there. And once it hits that lip, the tone will change. Let me see if that's all the way in yet. Not quite. I'll keep going with that. Okay, that's in there solid now. So you can see that race is all the way down inside here. And then do the same with the race for the back. Now, I did read something, or just watched a video a little while ago, that says one of the caliper pistons is the perfect size for doing this, and I just happen to have one of those around here somewhere. So there we have one of the brake caliper pistons, and it is a perfect size for driving in that rear race. So that's in there good and solid now. Let me just check. Make sure that's all the way down. Yep. I'll set that aside because I'll need that for the other one. So there we have the outer race and the inner race both in place. And so that's step 5 of the instructions. Now, one thing they recommend to check is sometimes you have to remove a little bit of material from the end of this cone. It can interfere with the cage here. In this case, I've got lots of room in there, so I don't have to worry about that. So that'll spin freely in there. So that's, we can go past that one. Now, before we grease this all up, we have to basically install it on the car to make sure that we've got the adequate clearances in play. I'm going to assemble this without the seal, and we'll just clean these off and lightly oil them in order to get this all done properly. Now, these instructions, of course, are specific to this kit. So you have the outer bearing, spacer, and then the original cone goes on top of that, and then the outer bearing, and then the washer, and then the castle nut. Now, the reason they supply a new castle nut is not just for a new one, is there is a difference between the two. This is the original one, and you'll see the new one is just that little bit shorter. I don't know if you can see that. So this one you could still use. You wouldn't be able to get a cotter pin past here because this would sit up too high on the spindle. Okay, so there we have it. Have that assembly. We've got the new bearing, a new spacer, the original cone. I'll call it that. Then we have the outer bearing, the washer from the original, and the new castle nut. And of course, there'll be a new pin through that. So the idea is to put this all together and put it on the car, torque this down, and make sure we have the correct free play and end play. So here we have the hub. Both inner and outer bearing races are in. We have the inner bearing, the first spacer, the spacer that comes originally on the car, the outer bearing, the washer, the new castellated nut, and of course the new cotter pin. And on the inside, we'll have a new seal and all the instructions on how to put that all together. But, well, that's all I have time for this video. Thanks for joining me. So come back next time when we get all these new parts put in the hub, put on the car, and properly adjusted. If you'd like to see where this whole Bugeye project started, I'll put a link to that video just over on the side here. You can go and check on that. I'd just like to say thank you to all those who have supported the channel by either commenting, subscribing, hitting that like button, hitting the super thanks, and picking up merchandise. And you'll find links to some of that merchandise in the description below. My name is Ian. This is the Econobox Garage. We'll see you next time.